Shout out to Mike for sharing this article with me. This was a piece published in Film Industry Watch back in September, and it talks about how in the post Me Too era in Hollywood, filmmakers have been pushing toxic masculine tropes and stereotypes in much of the films and movies that they've been creating. And as a result, the cultural narrative has shifted to see men as weak and as evil, and has repositioned women to be like the heroines in almost every movie you watch and every show you watch. And this is definitely true. I've definitely noticed there's an overrepresentation of women in these roles. I mean, they remade Ghostbusters and they cast all women in it. So you've definitely seen stuff like this. But the point of this piece is how pop culture is reshaping our social consciousness over how we view men. So as these tropes and stereotypes are emerging in Hollywood, they are having a real life impact on all of us. And of course, this doesn't come as any surprise. Like, yes, there is an overwhelming preponderance of toxic masculinity in culture right now, and this belief that all men are evil. But what this piece really highlights is that by capturing this in film and by capturing this in pop culture, you're basically codifying it and institutionalizing it. So this is something that will pass down generations from now and will become increasingly normalized. So it's really important to pay attention how this kind of stuff is being shaped by Hollywood. You know, it's not just woke writers and woke producers. Like there is definitely an agenda here to push anti-masculine stereotypes into movies, songs, TV, all that kind of stuff. And it's going to shape our society moving forward. So the piece opens up by talking about several different films. I think these are indie films because I haven't heard of them. The first one is Promising Young Women, or Young Woman. And he said the author writes here, from indie festival darlings to Hollywood blockbusters, a growing roster of films is casting masculinity in a harsh light, depicting men as abusive, weak, absent, or broken, while positioning women as victims turned avengers or the moral centers of the story. And it says here, why wrestle with the messy complexity of gender dynamics when you can flatten it into the simplest cliches imaginable? So it's not even just like recasting women in a different light and casting men in a negative light. It's diminishing gender dynamics entirely and just it's very reductionist in nature. Like it's far more easier to say, oh well, all men are bad and write films and write scripts to portray that than it is to acknowledge the complexities in human existence. So it's not even just like this is doing a great disservice to the genders right now and is contributing to conflict between both sides. Like this is just a disservice to filmmaking and storytelling writ large. Like complexity is what makes a lot of films really great. And if you're just going to use cliches and just reduce everything to simple binaries of good and bad, it makes for really bad storytelling too. So the first thing it talks about here is abusive, weak, or absent, the new male stereotype on screen. So this talks about never, rarely, sometimes, always. That's a film that apparently came out in 2020, and it's a young woman who is portrayed as being victimized from a sexual assault. And it says here, the men in Autumn's world, so one of the characters, all of them are either absent when needed or the source of trauma, whereas the moral agency lies entirely with Autumn and her female cousin, who supportively accompanies her on a secret trip to get an abortion. Film after film paints its male characters in a similarly dismal hue. So it's taken men out of the role as heroes in films, and where moral agency, I think, probably used to lie back in the pre-Me Too era, and it's kind of repositioning things. So not only are women are the heroines in a lot of these films, but it's where the moral compass of the film lies. And this is something that comes up time and time again throughout this piece that I think is really important because it represents a shift in morality in our society. And while feminists hate the patriarchy, I think there's something valuable, morally speaking, to having a patriarchal structure where people have defined roles and defined expectations. When you take a feminist led moral order, as we're seeing now, like what do you get from it? You get a lot of promiscuity. You get women aspiring to be OF models. The moral agency is found in their sexual prowess. It's not found in virtue. And so we've completely flipped the script on what morality even means. So I think that's really important when you recast women and in female roles as the moral epicenter. It changes the moral compass of society writ large, especially if this is happening across multiple films, multiple different TV shows. This isn't just an isolated thing here and there. So it says, in promising young women, men's misdeeds are the central evil, and the avenging angels a woman driven to drastic ends to expose them. Even basically decent men are portrayed as cowardly or culpable. The message is that every man is guilty, if not of assault, then of complicity or willful ignorance. And it's the women who bear the pain and seek justice. That's what one reviewer wrote. And so in this new cinematic landscape, even when men aren't outright villains, they're depicted as feckless, foolish, or fragile. So it basically extends culpability to all men. And this is something we're seeing in culture right now. Just every woman out there assumes that all men are bad, all men are evil, all men are out to do her harm. And that's certainly not the case. I mean, you have women who are freaked out now when men like approach them in public and they just assume every man is going to harass her. And I know, like from my own experience and experience living abroad, I never experienced catcalling or harassment to any degree until I lived overseas and I lived in big cities. And when I lived in big cities, I was surrounded by people who were not of the same cultural background as me, to put it politely. And so this is, I think, a byproduct of multiculturalism and living in places where you're separated from not just your family, but your community, a community that shares the same values and the same culture as you. Like, I'm not saying people don't do bad things, but the type of harassment that women talk about today and catcalling and feeling unsafe in public, like that was not something I experienced growing up. That was not something that I experienced in the public school system. That was not something I experienced going to Walmart or a shopping mall. That was only something I started to experience once I left my hometown. Once I lived overseas in a culture that was completely different than my own. And that's something I felt once I moved to a larger city, where there were people who were of a different cultural background than me that had different perceptions and expectations of women. So I think that's something to it. I think you have a lot of women who are perceiving violence coming from men or malintent. And it's quite distorted from reality. And a lot of it can be based on where they're living and who they're surrounding themselves with, and they're not even consciously aware of it. But then also it's being depicted in film and media, so now it's become quite normalized where every woman just assumes men are out to do her harm. And so, yeah, it really continuously brings up this theme of like the women being the moral center. And I think that is just, like I said, it redefines morality within society, and we're adopting female-centric morality, and that hasn't seemed to do much good. I don't know how promoting promiscuity and easy abortion access is indicative of good morality in a society. And so it also talks, it dives into a bunch of films here, but it also talks about Greta Gerwig's movie Barbie that came out a couple of years ago. I'll admit I haven't seen Barbie. That came out the same weekend as Oppenheimer. I chose to go watch Oppenheimer because obviously. And then once I learned that there was a lot of feminist tropes within Barbie, I was just like, no, I'm going to save my money. I'm not going to waste my time with this. But it basically depicts like the Barbies as overcoming the patriarchy. And in the film, Ken and his brethren are depicted as pointedly comical. They're vain, simple-minded, and easily manipulated by their own fragile egos. And so this is part of the whole storyline, is that they like go and they the Barbies leverage this against the Kens to retake back like Barbie land. And so it says Barbie's gleeful message is that when men do have power, they don't know what to do with it besides impose absurd chauvinism, and savvy women can easily outsmart them. The film pointedly makes its heroine the moral and emotional anchor, while the men learn a lesson in humility. This just blows my mind. I mean, I guess it doesn't, but it does. Like, the fact that so many feminist women seem to think that all men want to do is like obtain power and become chauvinistic because they have like they're incapable of directing power is just so willfully ignorant of history. Like, look at like look at the world around you. Look at like how far human civilization has come. Like, human civilization hasn't gotten to the point where it's at today because it was always women at the helm, women leading things. Like men have do great things too. Men have fought wars, men have built things, men have created empires. Like, we're all here today as evidence of great things that men do. And yes, there have been great women as well who are part of the historical narrative. And that's not to diminish anything that women do. But to say that, all men are just chauvinistic and they have no idea what to do with their power is just insane. Women want power too. I think it's a human instinct to want power. And I think it's the women who don't know what to do with power. Like, when you give women power, like what are they going to do with it? Just look at U.S. politics right now in the United States, whether you like Trump or not. Like, he's getting a lot of stuff done. So you've given a man power, he's gone and got stuff done. Like, if Kamala Harris were president right now, would any of this stuff be getting done? Whether you agree with it or not, like, so men definitely get things done. So another film they talk about here is Poor Things. So this is like an inversion on Frankenstein. So instead of a Dr. Frankenstein creating a monster, there's a woman who's been resurrected, and she has to go find her independence in the world, and she's kind of taken under the wing of a man who does ill harm to her, just kind of again fills all those tropes about how bad men are. And so it says here, Poor Things cast its men as either paternalistic protectors or libertine exploiters. So you're either trying to protect the women too much or you're trying to exploit them. And it skewers both. Bella ultimately asserts her autonomy, rejecting the cages both kinds of men offer. The film's feminist lens, it makes its sympathy clear. The men are foolish and corrupt. The woman is the one discovering authentic moral agency. So again, everything is the man's fault. The man can't do anything right. And it's the woman who is the one who comes out ahead. And so one of the things that this article calls attention to, which I appreciate, is that critics are rewarding the excoriation of masculinity with awards. So these films are getting Palme d'Ors, they're getting Oscars. They're the types of films that like the cultural elites watch. They're not, Marvel films. They're not going to be, your next Disney movie. These are the ones that are going to be critically acclaimed. They're going to be the ones that people talk about at galas and, cocktail parties and that kind of thing. They're like, if you watch these films, these are the types of movies that signify like you're culturally refined, if that's a good way to put it. And so what Hollywood has basically done is by awarding these films all sorts of different awards, it's signifying to filmmakers, hey, if you want an award too, you should make a film like this. So it provides proof that Vilifying Men is a ticket to festival glory. And so, of course, everyone wants, that kind of thing. If you're a filmmaker, like, yeah, you want to make it, you don't just want to make a great movie, you want to win awards and have all that kind of stuff, right? So people are definitely looking to this, especially indie filmmakers who want to make a name for themselves. They're like, okay, this is a fast track to, getting an award, getting my name out there. So of course they're going to, latch on to this. And I think that's part of the problem. So it says here, across these examples, Never, Rarely, Sometimes, Always, Promising Young Woman, Anatomy of a Fall, Barbie, Poor Things, Anora, and Triangle of Sadness. These are all the films that the author analyzes. Men in these stories are overwhelmingly sources of harm or hindrances to women. They are abusers, overgrown boys, or insecure wrecks. Women, by contrast, are victims who find strength, or caretakers who clean up the mess, or avengers delivering comeuppance. So women are never portrayed as weak or morally fallible or abusive. Like, women do a lot of bad stuff. And so this dichotomy between men bad, women good, it doesn't just reduce and simplify gender dynamics. It erases and obfuscates what's actually happening in the real world. Like, not all men are evil, and not all women are, avengers and blameless. Like, women do really bad things too. And so it says here, in the film surveyed above, male characters are overwhelmingly cast as predators, abusers, and enablers of violence, as though every man is complicit in misogyny. Yet hard data tells a very different story. Globally, only a fraction of men are ever accused of harassment, whether formally or informally. So here it's 0.01% of the male population. So you have all these films that are creating characters around a stereotype of men that isn't actually real. And this is one of the problems I have, one of the critiques I have with feminism, is a lot of feminists believe that in the 1950s, their grandmas were all being abused, and because they didn't work outside the home, and they were financially dependent on their husbands, they were living in the suburbs, that they were all victims of abuse. And I think this was a caricature of what life was really like back then, and only a minority of people. And I'm sure there were definitely women who were victims of abuse. You have to think of that period of time. A lot of men had just gotten back from the battlefields of World War II. PTSD is a real thing. And so there's no doubt in my mind that there was some degree of abuse and mental health problems happening in suburban households, but the degree to which it was actually happening, I think, is quite small. There weren't as many victims of abuse as feminists like to point to. And feminists are always, you have to consider domestic violence and all this kind of stuff. And that's one of their main talking points. And so the same is true here. It's, okay, you have all these film and media portrayals of men as abusive and enablers of violence, when in reality, it's a small minority of men who are actually the ones who are doing this. The vast majority, not even involved. And he says here, if we take the higher estimates, overwhelmingly, the majority of men, upwards of 90 to 95% worldwide, are never accused of harassment at all. So even in the workplace, like, a small minority of men are doing, awful things and behaving in a bad way. But the vast majority are fine. The vast majority of men are good quality human beings. Also talks about how men are not portrayed as victims, when in reality, men are certainly victims of a number of social maladies. So things like homelessness, victims of homicide, causing harm to themselves. These are all real life things that men deal with, and it's never portrayed in the media and in pop culture. It's only that men are dominating and they're in positions of power and they're abusive. There's no recognition or acknowledgement of the struggles that real men are facing in real life. And again, it talks about here, kind of what I was saying before with the 1950s, and how feminists like to say that it is women who were the victims. They call attention here to the fact that when intimate partner violence is one-sided, women were the perpetrator in more than 70% of those cases. And the data source here is from a PubMed study from 2007. So this may have changed in recent years, but I will say, my husband and I like to watch YouTube channels like Midwest Safety and other police cam channels. It's like cops, but better. So we watch a lot of those, and it's just like the raw body cam footage. And there's a lot of women. I'm not saying all the people they arrest, obviously, are women. They're not always stopping women for traffic violations, but there's a lot of women. There's a lot of women driving drunk, driving under the influence, endangering children. We watched one where there was a woman who was passed out in the middle of like a 4-lane highway, and she had an infant with her, and this like older couple came and was holding the infant. It was crying, was bottle feeding it, and this woman didn't have any shoes on. Her chest was falling out of her shirt. She was definitely on something, wasn't complying with the police at all, and couldn't even provide a family member for the to come pick up the child. And the older man and that was there helping just like take care of it was like, if no one claims this child, we'll take it. Complete strangers, no idea who that baby was, but it was like, we'll take it. And so a lot of, you just look around, see what happens, like in your neck of the woods. Like, women aren't as wonderful and great as everyone thinks they are. Even like school abuse, like just look at how many women are perpetrators of crimes against teenage students, that's, something that is incredibly common that no one talks about, that women do really awful things. No 30, 20 something, 30 something teacher should be flirting with a 15-year-old boy. And that happens more often than we acknowledge. So women are definitely, not necessarily the benevolent actors that we like to think they are. And I think this is definitely certainly a very plausible statistic where, women initiate a lot more violence than we acknowledge. And so the author says this really matters because when films repeatedly suggest that men as a class are dangerous, complicit, or broken, they risk cementing a cultural script that far outstrips reality. Yes, harassment and abuse are serious problems, but they are perpetrated by a minority of men, often repeat offenders. And like I was saying before, if you only focus on the men, you're giving the women a pass. You're not acknowledging that women are out there harming children, doing really bad things, because you're just assuming that only men are the ones capable of doing that. Cinema, however, portrays them as the majority, if not the entirety. Meanwhile, the real vulnerabilities of men, homelessness, self-harm, homicide, are erased from the screen. The result is a distortion. Audiences are invited to see the problem not as a subset of bad actors, but as masculinity itself. So this is basically what's happened in film and media, is they've put masculinity on trial. They've indicted it in the court of public opinion, and they said masculinity is bad, masculinity is toxic, and now they're trying to do everything as possible to basically like emasculate men and erase whatever vestiges of masculinity are left in our culture. And so it says here in real life, not on screen, it's actually safer to be a woman than to be a man, because when you take all these things into account, death, fatal work injuries, other types of violence, like it's safer to be a woman than a man. And even you look at the lifespan that women live longer than men too. So there's a lot more threats in the world facing men than women. And I think this is true. I really do. Things have definitely changed, but from a female perspective, I'll say if I'm ever in danger or I feel like I'm in danger, I don't see any reason why I couldn't go into like a gas station or run to a restaurant and say like, hey, I need help. I think there's like this instinct where you see a woman in distress and you're going to help them. I think some of that might have changed, obviously, in post Me Too. I think there are men who would be like, okay, no, you go away. I don't want to deal with you. But for the most part, I think that still has kind of prevailed in some ways where, if you're a woman and you need help, someone's going to help you. If you're, on the side of the road and your tire's broken down, someone's going to help you. The same is not true for men. Like if a man was being hunted down by someone trying to kill him and he ran into a nail salon or some other female dominated place, like a Lululemon store, would the women there help him? Probably not. So even with that, like I think women still have a far better chance of getting help in an emergency situation than men do. And I think that's, that tells you kind of how we view one another. It says, in the post-Me Too era, revenge has become an ideological shift in Hollywood. And so these portrayals are no accident of individual storytelling. They're part of a broader ideological shift in Hollywood after Me Too. And so the response from the creative community in Hollywood was to create more films centering women's perspectives, more brutal examinations of gender power imbalance, and unmistakably less patience for glorifying or excusing bad men. In fact, Hollywood has also arguably turned cinema into a vehicle for advocacy, determined to dramatize the wages of male sin. So Me Too opened the door for changing how men and women are portrayed in film. I think part of this too is also the feminization of institutions like Hollywood. So when Me Too happened, you saw a flip where women started to have majority positions in a lot of these places. So, it's like places like medical school and law school, like women are now the majority. On college campuses, women are now the majority. And Hollywood too, you started seeing men were not being hired to be writers. Men weren't being hired to be producers. Men weren't being cast for certain roles. It was women. You saw a lot more women being cast. And so as a result, these women ascended to positions of power. within different companies and within different organizations. And collectively, they've been asserting their feminist agenda onto these institutions. And so if you get enough women in these positions of power, this becomes the new norm. And this is, I think, what we're seeing today is the writers, the producers, folks in charge of coming up with movies, folks who are being awarded awards, like it's all women. And so you have the feminist hive mind that is self-reinforcing this belief that men are evil and that women are the ones who are, good. And it's not just that women are good, they're on a mission now to avenge all the past mistakes that men have done. So like it says here, to dramatize the wages of male sin. So by embedding Me Too's lessons into scripts and characters, filmmakers have essentially institutionalized the cultural reckoning within popular narratives. So that basically means that they're going to continue to watch these movies even past, their prime. It's like, I watched Titanic because it's on Netflix, like a week or two ago. Okay, that movie is, oh my gosh, that movie's almost 30 years old. Wow, I feel old. Okay. That movie has been around for a really long time. Okay. So that's a great example is you have films like that stand the test of time. People continue to watch it and they might share it with their children someday, and they'll grow up with the messaging in that film. And, so this is what it means by institutionalizing it, is that now, after the headlines and the predatory bosses fade, movies like the ones referred to in this article, The Assistant or Promising a Woman, will remain to remind future viewers of the period when society finally said enough to men's abuse of power. So this is, the legacy, the cultural legacy we're leaving our children and our grandchildren. Okay. And so it talks about here how there's been a surge of female-led vengeance tales and social satires that have come up in this new post-Me Too world. And so you have stylish revenge thrillers like Promising Young Woman to action flicks with female assassins mowing down male abusers. Vengeance as is presented as cathartic justice. These movies have a clear emotional aim, deliver satisfaction or at least grim vindication by punishing or overcoming the on-screen avatars of so-called toxic masculinity. So it's not even enough at this point just to call out the potential problems that men cause women. It's they have to take it one step further and seek vengeance against them. So it's and this is why the repositioning of the moral compass really matters, because it changes the dynamic where if a wrong is done to you, it's now being framed as, okay, it's your responsibility to take revenge when something bad is done to you. That's the moral framework that is being created around this. It's saying that vengeance is good, that revenge is good. And so when vengeance and revenge are good, okay, what's the point of justice, And then what's the point of your community? If you're someone who can take the law into your own hands, well, why defer to authority? Why defer to the rule of law? So there's a lot more to this than just how women are being framed. It really deconstructs the moral framework of society and it positions it with something new. And that new framework is intended to neutralize power structures that these feminist women think are patriarchal. And in reality, those power structures, justice and the rule of law, are what makes our, democracy and the free world go round. So if you get rid of those things and everything is just, feminist interpreted justice or feminist interpreted revenge, that's not a society I want to live in. That is feminist authoritarianism. So it says, in short, flipping the gender script, making women the heroes and men the villains may redress an age-old imbalance. But if every story is framed as women good, men bad, even some feminists worry it creates a new kind of caricature. So it does create this. It creates this revenge-based narrative where women are out to seek justice, but on their own terms, not in the terms that we collectively have agreed on in our society. Still, it's not clear for now. It's clear for now that Hollywood and the independent film world sees itself as having a moral mandate. The entertainment industry was, after all, ground zero for Me Too. Now it is using the tools of storytelling to reinforce the movement's message. And this moral mandate piece is important because What you may not realize is the elites, so the cultural, the social, the financial, the intellectual, people who identify themselves as elites believe they have a mandate to create a new moral framework in their image. So they've rejected conservative values. A lot of those conservative values are rooted in Christianity. So you have documents and texts and an actual like book you can read and study and learn about, a moral framework that everyone pretty much agrees upon. They're saying we're not going to deal with this. We don't like this. This is patriarchal. This is bad. We're going to replace it with something different. And so you have people like writers in Hollywood, like producers, like academic professionals, like lawyers. You have all these women who have attained some sort of status in society, and they're the ones who are creating the new moral framework that they expect the rest of us to abide by. So this isn't just, how things are being portrayed in film. This is a rejection of like a Christian-centered moral framework, which for better or for worse has done Western civilization pretty good. It's a complete rejection of that, and it's an elevation of a very feminist-centered moral framework, and this is one that other human beings are creating, and humans are very fallible creatures, so it's a far from perfect moral framework at best. Okay, so it goes on to talk about how toxic masculinity has gone from, or how it's really changed in public discourse, and how it's gone from just something to think about to like gospel in Hollywood, and something that like must be included and must be talked about and everything moving forward. And so feminists have adopted toxic masculinity as shorthand to characterize the misogynist, abusive, or emotionally stunted behaviors common in men. In public discourse and often in these films, toxic masculinity doesn't refer to individual bad actors so much as it indicts an entire system of social conditioning. It's the idea that traditional norms of manhood, the old boys don't cry, might makes right, so your wild oats mentality, creates a poison that spreads through men's psyches and by extension hurts women and society. So it's not just like, okay, some men bad, it's all men bad because of their masculinity. Therefore, we have to neutralize this threat because it's hurting society and it's hurting women. So it's an erasure of what it means to be men. And I didn't know this, but apparently in 2018, the American Psychological Association released guidelines to therapists who are working with boys and men that declared that traditional masculinity is psychologically harmful. So, like, it's bad enough that like therapy is really female dominated and feminist coded. So right from the get-go, men struggling with mental health like can't even get the help they need because their only options are really to go work with crazy feminist therapists. But even then, the standards in which these feminists are being trained, they're being taught to believe that masculinity is harmful. So even if you had a mental health issue and you wanted to seek out therapy, you're not probably going to get the solutions you need because these women who are acting as therapists have been told that you are incurable because of your masculinity, and like it's just incredibly problematic. So it says, in effect, the APA distilled toxic masculinity into an official stance. The time-honored traits of manhood, strength, stoicism, dominance were recast as risk factors or pathologies to be curbed. Like the idea that you would want to get rid of stoicism boggles my mind. I'm a huge fan of Stoic philosophy. I think there's a lot of value to it. And telling men to be, telling anyone to be less stoic, but definitely men, how does that help society at all? So for many, all this is seen as a necessary re-education of the audience, but others argue has become a blunt instrument pathologizing all things male. So this is part of it too. It's social conditioning. It's re-education. So they're like, okay, this is bad. Toxic masculinity is bad. So we're going to use these films to, re-educate the unwashed masses because you are not elite, you are not educated enough to think for yourselves. Therefore, you have to rely on culture and pop culture narratives to help guide you. And that's how, a lot of information, whether you realize it or not, is transmitted. A lot of values and a lot of beliefs are transmitted through pop culture, through storytelling. And this has always certainly been the case. I mean, that's why when you read the New Testament, it's filled with parables, right? Like there's a reason why Jesus taught with storytelling, because it's very effective. And so this is what they're doing, is they're not just pushing an agenda, they're trying to re-educate all of us. Okay, so it goes on to say that this has all been a remarkable cultural pivot. We've gone from James Bond seducing women and saving the day with nary a thought to his macho antics to a landscape where a character like Bond is presented as a problematic relic or subverted as an object of critique. In essence, masculinity itself has been put on trial in our movies, and the verdict from the creative class, more often than not, is guilty as charged. And so this dives deeper into gender politics and how this is Hollywood is just a piece in a larger puzzle in terms of the culture war between men and women. So it says the war on men that some commentators decry is in large part a reaction to the kind of messaging Hollywood is now amplifying, messaging that aligns closely with progressive, feminist informed politics. And this makes sense. A lot of folks in Hollywood tend to vote Democratic and skew in that direction. It says young men have been veering rightward, while young women have trended even more to the left, creating a stark polarization. And so I want to call attention to this because there's an infographic that has been making the rounds on X, and it shows that that's actually not true. So men have pretty much stayed the same. They've always been a little bit more conservative. But for the most part, like men haven't really moved at all. If anything, it's women. It's over time. Women have gotten more and more they've gotten more and more liberal. And what's interesting, someone called this out on X here. What's interesting is there's a peak here in 2010, which makes sense, right? So you saw like probably right in here would have been Me Too. So you see a huge spike during Me Too, and then obviously COVID happened. That was a mass psychosis event where women, I think, were definitely playing into whatever they were being told. I mean, speaking from experience, I was one of them, definitely not thinking critically or as critically as I could have been during that period of time. But it says here, it says it's kind of gone down a little bit. And I don't know if this is necessarily the case because something that someone had called out on X is that this survey is 18 to 29-year-olds. So it doesn't account for the millennial men who have aged out of this demographic. So the millennial women in here where that you saw a steady increase, they're now, out of this demographic. So it's likely still quite high, especially as millennial women now are in positions where they can make decisions, and they're the ones who can make, write certain things in films and make casting decisions. And, it does show a decline here for women. So there might be some sort of correction happening. I suspect too, just because of the differences in demographics, there's fewer Gen Z women than there are millennial women. But regardless, I mean, this shows that women tend to skew over time. Women have become increasingly more liberal, and so that creates the perception that men are moving to the right, when in reality it's women who have been moving further and further to the left. And so it says here, this hints at a deeper cultural split. Many young women identify feminism as social liberalism, whereas a lot of young men feeling attacked or alienated by that rhetoric are gravitating to more conservative or contrarian spaces. An era when the personal is political, as the saying goes, one stance on masculinity, has practically become a litmus test. And this is, certainly true. You see feminist women, Gen Z women, posting TikToks about this kind of stuff all the time. Like they cannot stand, how men today react and how they perceive, social liberalism and feminism and liberal politics writ large. And so it continues to go on to say that, it talks about how the media landscape has really created a dynamic around this where women feel like there's been a loss of men, and they're not acknowledging that it's women who have alienated themselves from men. So it calls it to attention the viral New York Times piece that went viral this past summer called Men, Where Have You Gone? There's another one about heterofatalism. I covered both of these. But it creates a narrative, not just in pop culture, but in media of, okay, men are going away, men are doing their own thing, women are left alone, and like women think that they're in a state of stasis, and it's the men around them that have changed, when in reality it's they themselves who have changed, and they just haven't looked in the mirror. And it says the media drumbeat paints a picture of masculinity in crisis, but crucially it often frames it as a crisis men themselves have caused by not adapting to modern norms. In reality, many men feeling unfairly blamed for crimes they did not commit have chosen to check out of dating in a society they increasingly perceive as hostile toward them. I think it's, yeah, I mean, it's absolutely true. I, read the comments all the time, and I think you guys would all agree on that. There's no use in playing the game when you're cast as evil and abusive, and it's lose-lose either way. So men are definitely opting out, and women are just like, what's going on? They have no idea. They've been caught completely flat-footed. So this is on the other side of the aisle. Conservative politicians and pundits have leaned into defending traditional masculinity, accusing the left and Hollywood of collectively waging a war on men. So it's not even just like how masculinity is being framed or a war on masculinity, it's politicization of masculinity itself. So to be masculine, to have any sort of masculine traits now, is to be, conservative, is to be cast as conservative. So whether you actually are politically or not, it doesn't matter. Like a lot of young women today, they'll see any sort of masculine any sort of masculine traits, they'll automatically assume, oh, okay, this guy is conservative, and therefore, because of that, he's bad, he's dangerous, he's evil. So, yeah, I mean, it's completely like the perception of masculinity in culture has completely overlapped with the perception of masculinity in politics, and it's not just a demonization of it on the silver screen; it's a demonization of it in real life too, and that's translating into politics. And so it says the cultural backlash against masculinity that our film title references is very much part of a broader culture war, one in which the Democrat-leaning camp tends to view the elevation of women and critique of men as progress, and the Republican-leaning camp sees it as a demonization and a folly. So this is why that moral framework matters, because progress equals morality, and that's what a lot of folks on the left believe. They believe if I am making progress, I'm doing good. Again, because they don't have any sort of moral framework or foundation for themselves outside of themselves. A lot of conservatives are religious. They believe they're, they identify as Christians and they're practicing in their faith. And so they understand that they are subservient to a power greater than them. And that is what is important to them. And that's how they derive their moral foundation for how they live their lives. The folks on the left, they don't have that. So they have to create a moral framework for themselves from somewhere. And so they create it out of thin air for themselves, and a lot of times it's the elites at the top who are the ones distilling it and pushing it down. But the idea of adhering to this progress, a change in values, is in itself a moral act. So if you don't adopt these changes, you are considered immoral. And you saw this during COVID. You saw this with the use of pronouns. And when that was kind of in its heyday and a big deal, like to adopt pronouns was a signal that you are a good, righteous, moral person according to the ideological winds of the time. And so I think that's really important. Why positioning feminist characters as characters generating moral agency is really important, because like I said, it changes the moral compass of society writ large. Okay, it goes on to say popular culture, movies, shows, ads may tell them that their gender is suspect and they need to reform, which means be more sensitive, less aggressive, relinquish power. At the same time, countervailing voices tell them they are victims of a feminist agenda and they should hold fast to traditional manhood or risk losing themselves. It's no wonder that many men feel bewildered or embattled. I think this is why you're seeing, a retreat of men as well, especially Gen Z men. It's like what do? You have, I think, both sides coming at you, and you're just like, what have I done? What have I done? You're living your day-to-day life. You've probably done nothing to hurt anyone else, or at least hopefully not intentionally. You're not out hunting down women, but still you're being cast in a way where you're bad and you're evil, and that your manhood itself is a problem. And so you can't absolve yourself of that. That's like a sin you can never find grace from. Like you will never have salvation from a sin that is endogenous to who you are as a human being. And that's what's so problematic about all of these narratives, is you can't undo your whiteness. The only way you can undo your manhood, I guess, is to become a woman. So I think that's why the trans issue has become so popular among young men. You see a lot more young men transitioning to women than you do the other way around. That's the only way really you can do that, is to change yourself. Other than that, like, there's nothing you can really do. So it's, this is asking men to accept the fact that they are less than, that they are fallible creatures, that there's no salvation, no grace for them whatsoever. And that's what the feminist narrative is telling them. So it says lonely, single, and left behind, the real world consequences for men. So this isn't just the silver screen. This isn't just culture. It's not just politics. There's actual consequences for this. So amid the cultural crossfire, men are living through a quiet crisis. By numerous statistical measures, men in Western societies are struggling in education, relationships, mental health, and the timing coincides with, though not solely caused by, the post-Me Too cultural climate. Yeah. So I don't think Me Too was causative, but I think there's a lot of stuff that was happening mid 2010s, just a feminization of the workforce, rise of DEI, changes in academia, and how different things were taught. So things like CRT were being taught more vociferously than before. And so then Me Too happened, and again, I think it just kind of created a permissible environment for people to start attacking men in ways that hadn't necessarily been permissible prior to that. It says here, between 2019 and 2022, precisely as cultural messages about men's toxicity grew louder, the percentage of single men under 30 who say they were actively seeking a romantic partner plummeted from 61% to 50%. So half of single men just opt out of dating entirely. Social scientists have pointed to a mix of factors. So a lot of people talk about economic woes, addiction and video games, fear of rejection, especially with Me Too style allegations, a sense of alienation. And so what's interesting here is by contrast, single women's interest in dating did not decline nearly as much in that period. So while men stopped being interested in dating, they started reacting to the political and cultural narrative that was being foisted upon them. Women didn't change. So women became more liberal. Their values changed. They identified themselves with those changing values and as being progressive and thus morally righteous. And so women changed. Men did not. Whereas men were getting the opposite messaging that men are evil, men are bad. And so men started reacting, started opting out. And then women are like, wait a minute, where did you guys go? And so that, I think, has been a huge, obviously a huge problem as well. And I think it's creating a new degree, I think, of alienation with women that I think we're going to start seeing play out more and more. And so it says here, marriage and family formation has sharply declined. So the rise of voices disparaging men is inherently problematic, might play a psychological role. Some men question whether they're wanted or valued in a committed partnership beyond their paycheck. I recently did a video on this where 63% of men reported feeling unloved. For a lot of these same reasons. So that's definitely a concern that men feel. Men are also lagging educationally and economically. So it says women are earning 70% of university degrees. I know on American college campuses and at the undergrad level, there's a majority of women who are students versus men, and then the vast majority of graduate degrees are now being awarded to women instead of men. And so this is a large extent the result of affirmative action efforts that were instituted in the 1970s when people were trying to reverse those numbers. But things have been corrected, right? Like I said in the beginning, the feminization of different institutions and the rise of college-educated women means that they're not parity, and in some cases have replaced men. So there's been nothing to acknowledge that has actually happened, and that, okay, we need to stop pushing women. They've the whatever problems in the past, feminists like to blame on, there not being enough women represented. Now there's too many women being represented, but nothing has been done to course correct or acknowledge that men are suffering as a result. This is really playing out in the job front. So men have seen declines in labor force participation. A smaller proportion of prime-age men, so those 25 to 54, are working today than in previous generations. This is in part due to the loss of manufacturing jobs and other traditionally dominated male industries, but also because they know there's reverse discrimination with DEI policies, and this is something that Jacob Savage covered at length in his viral essay in Compact Magazine, that this is absolutely happening. Men have been completely sidelined in the professional workforce. Okay, so it also talks about mental health. And so the concern is that as men's social and economic prospects diminish, and as they internalize society's messages about men being problems, their mental well-being may further erode. So they're getting hit at all fronts. They don't have the means to get the jobs they want, to build the lives they want to live. They're socially stigmatized, and there's this new cultural moral narrative that says that they're evil and there's nothing they can do about themselves. Like they're fundamentally flawed, and that makes them unlovable and unworthy and undeserving. So, yeah, of course, that's going to have massive impacts on one's mental health. And so it talks about how some have retreated into nihilism or resentful online subcultures. That's why you're seeing a rise in like incel forums on Reddit, and that reinforces alienation. Others are checking out of ambition in relationships. They're often opting for a quiet life with minimal responsibilities. So this is something a document in Japan. It's called hikikimori. I'm butchering that. Hikikimori. These are basically fully grown men who still live at home. They just stay in their bedrooms in their parents' house, and they don't engage with the outside world. They're pretty much shut in. So there's some men here who are starting to adopt that as well. And so how much of the male malaise can be blamed on the cultural backlash against masculinity is up for debate. Certainly economic and technological forces are huge factors, but it's hard to ignore the feedback loop between cultural narratives and individual self-concept. If young men constantly encounter stories where men are brutish or superfluous, might it shape how they see themselves? Absolutely. And, you can use a corollary with, how women have been depicted and the hypersexualization of women in media. And just, again, growing up as a millennial in the 2000s, seeing photoshopped images of celebrities in magazines and your Kardashian kind of stereotype of what beauty is, and it creates like a standard that you can never reach. It's an unachievable standard, and then you do see yourself negatively. You're like, okay, well, this is what the standard of beauty is, and this person has all the success in the world, so clearly there's a correlation between beauty and success. So if I'm not like this person, if I don't look like them, then I'm not going to get the same success that they have. And so it creates an unrealistic standard. And so men are continuously encountering this narrative where they're evil, they're awful, and that they're morally bankrupt. And so, of course, they're going to see themselves in a negative light. And so when this is reinforced subconsciously in culture, this just further, further inflames things. Okay. So it says this might be a net positive for women's comfort, but can also contribute to chilling effect on men's social initiation. So some of the more dire consequences hit not only men, but society at large. So loneliness and aimlessness of men can have political fallout. Disaffected young men are often drawn to extremist ideologies or demagogic leaders who promise to restore their pride. This is definitely true. I, in college, studied a lot of suicide terrorism and Islamic extremism. And this was one of the things where young men were, you had imams in different like Al-Qaeda oriented groups in the Middle East. And that's how they were recruiting people, is they were kind of tuning into this, where you had a youth bulge in the Middle East. There just weren't any jobs, no prospects for, their marriage and having children is really important. So you need to have a good job to be able to support a family and have, lots of kids. And so young men weren't getting what they needed. They were restless. And so when you have an entire population of restless military age men with nothing to do and nothing to live for, that's a very dangerous combination. So that was problematic. And that's how, Al-Qaeda and different terrorist groups were recruiting a lot of young men, because they had, religious gurus who were promoting messaging that they wanted to hear. And so the same, much of the same is happening right now. It's not necessarily religious in nature, but, definitely a lot of the same stuff is happening. And so it says here, there's evidence of this in the rise of online misogynist movements, but also in broader politics. The gender gap in voting is at historic highs, with men more likely to support populist or right-wing candidates who explicitly push back on liberal social trends. This can further polarize and fragment communities. Likewise, because women are going to left, it's also going in that direction as well. So while men are retreating and potentially going more rightward in that regard, and seeking out solace on online communities that can push a far-right narrative, women are pandering into the feminist socialist narrative as well. So it's definitely pushing us further and further apart. It says a generation of women faces a shortage of economically stable and emotionally available male partners, and millions of children are growing up with minimal or no involvement from their fathers, since unmarried, disengaged men often end up detached from family life. So this is another consequence. I will say, I think there's something to this. Not necessarily that children are growing up without involvement from their fathers, but I think there's a correlation between the rise of feminism and like gentle parenting. I think feminist-led parenting probably not good. Like you need a strong male figure in the family. And so I think there's something to this as well. You're seeing, Gen Alpha. You have teachers who are literally quitting because they can't handle Gen Alpha. And I think a lot of these kids are being raised by feminine dominant households. And I think you're starting to really see that play out. So it says, in short, the war on men is not just a metaphor playing out in think pieces and movies. It has flesh and blood consequences we can measure. So it dives into some more stats here. In a conference, Scott Galloway. It talks about Rahm Emanuel and Scott Galloway talking about some of the impacts of this as well in real life. So the solution that the author provides in this essay is that there needs to be some sort of balance. So the current narrative wherein masculinity is so often equated with toxicity or inadequacy poses the question, what vision of masculinity are we offering for the future? So the challenge for filmmakers, for society, is to find balance, to continue calling out, rejecting the genuinely toxic behaviors of a very small minority of men without tipping into a blanket vilification of men as a class. And so it says, in the meantime, the war on men in cinema reflects a broader hostility in society, a warning that traditional manhood is no longer celebrated but caricatured. The challenge ahead is not to polarize further by painting one gender as oppressor and the other as victim, but to redefine relationships between the genders in a way that values both men and women. Okay, so that's the end of the piece. I don't think we're going to find a balance. I think things are kind of going to continue going down this path, especially because if you have women at the helm and women are decision makers and they're the ones who are making casting decisions and they're creating films and they're the ones winning awards, like it's only going to be, a positive feedback loop for them. They're just going to keep rewarding themselves, rewarding that messaging, and they're going to keep providing jobs and opportunities to themselves, right? And people who align with them and agree with them. So I think by shutting men out of these like creative careers where they would have an impact on culture, I think that has only further cemented a lot of these like post-Me Too narratives about the differences between men and women. So I don't know that we'll have anything new of value anytime soon. Maybe. I hope I'm wrong. Maybe we'll have something new, but I think much of the same is going to continue. So where do we go from here? I think it's incumbent on us to recognize that this is happening, that culture in the media and pop culture specifically has been weaponized in order to push a particular agenda, an agenda that says men bad, women good, that promotes a vengeance and revenge-filled mission that women have been cast to follow. So not just men good, men bad, women good, but there's the vengeance element as well, because that changes the moral framework of our society. So I think we need to understand that is happening at a philosophical level and start rejecting some of this stuff. So, obviously not like supporting films like this that have this messaging. But I think too, reintroducing stuff from the past. There's an entire library of wonderful films from 30s, 40s, 50s, John Wayne, spaghetti westerns. There's no shortage of things to watch, to be entertained by. And so instead of being caught in a cycle, like a consumer cycle of constantly demanding new, I think we need to go back to the past and see, okay, what worked before. So that means starting to read, literature again, like actually picking up a book, reading Jane Austen, stuff like that. Going back to older films and watching those, older TV shows, if you can get those on DVD, get those on DVD. But I think that's going to have to be the path forward for now. You have to starve this stuff out of an audience. If there's no audience for this type of content, for these types of films, for this type of pop culture, it'll eventually extinguish itself out. So if you find other things to meet your entertainment needs that don't pander to all of this, I think it's good for men's mental health, right? You want to watch, movies where men are portrayed positively, where masculinity is portrayed positively. So don't, continue watching stuff that is going to frame men in a bad light. Same with women. I think we need to have the same thing happening for women, where we need to re-elevate traditional feminine roles, not this girl boss nonsense. And especially, ones where the women are these avengers who are out to, seek justice in their own right. I don't necessarily think that's a good thing. So I think we need to go, kind of go back, see the stuff that worked in the past, and then from there, you know, bide time, and hopefully, in a generation or two, things will course correct. But I don't think that things will change anytime soon. So, I think we got to kind of work with some of the older films and some of the older media that we have, and really push back against a lot of the stuff that's coming out, because I think it's doing a lot more harm than good. I'd be curious to know if you've seen any films lately that you've noticed this trend where the dynamics between men and women in terms of how they're cast and how they're portrayed on screen, how that shapes your perception of yourself and your perception of the world around you. And if you see that they're complementary, like your politics are now, definitely feeling aligned with some of the things you're seeing in culture and in the media. Definitely be curious to know if you've picked up on this in pop culture in particular. Definitely share any examples of films you've seen where you've definitely noticed this. But yeah, that's what I have for you today. Thanks again to Mike for sharing this. It was a bit of a long piece, but I think it covers a lot of really good stuff about how you're starting to see a lot of feminist narratives show up in film and how it's vilifying men. Thanks as always for watching. I appreciate you for tuning in. Definitely like and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video.